Well, let us now turn to our first segment of today's meeting, which is to hear some excellent instruction from Devin Thorpe, and it's now my privilege to give you a little bit of introduction to Devin. Devin lists currently as his bio that he is an author. He has, by my count, 4 books available on Amazon, and I know he'll be talking a little bit about those, but 2 I know that I have personal experience with are Your Mark on the World and Crowdfunding for Social Good, Financing Your Mark on the World. Devin's also an advisor and a consultant to businesses, and he's a Forbes contributor. If you log on to the Forbes website and type his name in, you'll find a lot of good instruction from him on a variety of topics. Devin is a graduate of the University of Utah David Eccles School of Business, and he was the distinguished alum in 2006. And after that, he received an MBA from Cornell University, and during his time there, he ran the student newspaper. His employment history is very prestigious. He was the chief financial officer of MountainWest, which was the fastest growing company in Utah and number 3 on the 2009 Inc. 500. Before that, he was the treasurer at USANA Health Sciences, very prominent company here in town. He's also been an entrepreneur. He founded and operated a boutique investment banking firm where he advised on merger and acquisition financing transactions that aggregated to more than $500 million. He also ran an independent mortgage company. He's got some time in government where he worked for USTAR and also worked for Senator Garn on the U.S. Senate Banking Committee staff. He lived in China recently for a year where he taught and wrote, and he is also a longtime member of the MountainWest Capital Network. He's twice been our president and currently serves as vice chair. He is a nationally recognized speaker on the topic of crowdfunding, and that is the topic that he is going to address us on today. So please join me in welcoming to the podium Devin Thorpe. Thank you.
That's genuinely embarrassing, but thank you, Todd. How many of you would like more money? By show of hands. Is there anyone that would like less money? Because I can really help you. Okay, let's focus on the more money. We're going to talk about crowdfunding today, and I know that's a story, an issue that, for some of you that resonates as very meaningful. For others of you, this is sort of a baffling topic. I'm hoping that those of you who are familiar with crowdfunding are not frustrated by this. The overview that I'll give today, we're constrained on time, but I hope you'll recognize that there are many in the room that have really very limited exposure to crowdfunding, and so we're going to talk at a fairly high level. Let me start by sharing a story. There's a fellow by the name of Eric Mijakovsky who invented a watch. I'm wearing one here. His watch he called the Pebble watch. It's a smartwatch. It talks to your phone across Bluetooth technology, so it can access the internet through your phone and do whatever it's programmed to do as a result. He launched his business, built the first prototype, and started working on it back in 2007. Raised a little bit of angel money and struggled along for 5 years trying to bring this to market. There was not a single venture capitalist. He was in Silicon Valley. No venture capitalist would put up any money for this. His angel investors lost complete patience with him and with the project, and he was out of options. And so, in lacking any alternative, he put the Pebble watch as a project on Kickstarter and raised $10 million. So it was, as you can imagine, a different situation for him all of a sudden. The venture capital rolled in, he's rolled the product out to market. And so he proved And I think it was really, that was kind of the moment that crowdfunding began to take shape as a bona fide financing mechanism for entrepreneurs. It was also about that same time, well, let me just add one thing. The venture capital markets, not only are they not perfect, and I think you'd have to agree that if the public was ready to spend $10 million on a never-before-seen product like the Pebble Watch, venture capitalists had missed the opportunity, right? Venture capitalists also almost never fund women. Now, some of you may not think of that as a problem, but I do. And I think a lot of people see that as a problem. Minorities are also tend to get less than their fair share of venture capital. Now, I don't think this is anything to do with a venture capitalist's desire not to fund women or minorities. I think this is driven principally by the traditional screening method that venture capitalists use. And that is, if you can get a good introduction to me, I will listen to you. If you can't, your pitch goes into a completely separate pile. Well, if you are a white man, you are far more likely to know the white men at the venture firm than if you are a woman or a minority. So it's, I don't think it is an intentional bias. I think it is an artifact of the processes that venture capitalists use to screen deals. So crowdfunding, one of the things about crowdfunding is that all the data that's coming in demonstrates that women and minorities are getting their fair share of crowdfunding dollars. So the same bias that exists in the venture capital world does not exist in crowdfunding. So this really is reshaping entrepreneurship in the United States and around the world. These crowdfunding sites are sites that you are more likely to be familiar with because these are sites that consumers use all the time. You've probably seen people point you to a Kickstarter campaign to help fund an independent film or to record a CD or for some novel technology or something. You may have seen an Indiegogo project. The University of Utah has a number of projects they've done on Rocket Hub. Fundly is a great one for donations to nonprofits, and GoFundMe is the one that you probably have seen when you have a friend who's raising money for another friend who has cancer or something, right? So a lot of great crowdfunding sites. I've shown you, what, 6 here? I checked the most authoritative directory of crowdfunding sites yesterday, and the site lists over 2,000 crowdfunding sites. So if you need one, be careful, you may trip over one. In fact, I think in the room today we have a couple of crowdfunding sites. There's a company in Utah called Crowd Engines that makes crowdfunding websites. So those folks may be here in the room today. And then Josh Casteller and Todd Crossland are a couple of Utah entrepreneurs who have created a new site that should be up and running later this month. So lots of stuff going on in crowdfunding in Utah. Let me talk about the Jobs Act. Now, the Jobs Act changes very significantly what's going on in the crowdfunding world, because up until the Jobs Act, crowdfunding was a way to generate sales or donations. But you couldn't raise equity or debt using crowdfunding in a legal way prior to the Jobs Act. So the Jobs Act created the legal infrastructure for issuing securities through a crowdfunding approach. This was a bill that was passed with broad bipartisan support. I love the fact that it was championed principally. Its primary thought leader was a guy named Patrick McHenry, a congressman from the South, who is an avowed member of the Tea Party, and President Obama, at the other end of the political spectrum, enthusiastically signed this bill into law. It really is good law, and that's why it passed with such broad bipartisan support. I want to just review some of the key titles and provisions of the law just to kind of create a framework for our discussion. The first thing to understand is the general solicitation provisions of Title II of the Act. The 1933 and 34 Acts of the Securities Law framework have defined the issuance of securities for the last 80 years in our country. And one of the fundamental principles is there is essentially no circumstance in which you are allowed to publicly advertise a security for sale. There are very, very few, very narrow exceptions to that. You just are not allowed. Anything that the SEC governs, you can't advertise until Title II. And the SEC was required to issue regulations to govern general solicitation. Those provisions became effective on September 23rd of 2013. So we've now had about 6 months of people actually generally soliciting securities. So we're beginning to see how it works. It is a mind-warping change in securities laws to think about this, because you think of when you think of a public offering, remember, you don't see a public offering advertised in the Wall Street Journal. A public offering can only be sold by prospectus. This general solicitation has no such requirement. You can literally advertise in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Deseret News. Wherever you want to advertise, you can advertise. Now, of course, most people aren't, but you can do anything you want in terms of opening your mouth to generally solicit securities under this new provision. Title III governs real crowdfunding, and the distinction between general solicitation and real crowdfunding is principally that when we talk about Title II, although you can advertise to everyone in the world, you can advertise to 6-year-olds, you can advertise to poor people, you can advertise to anyone you want, you can only take money from accredited investors. Under Title III, you can take money from anyone. Now, there are limits to how much money you can take, and the law really looks pretty reasonable. You can take up to 5% of someone's income or assets if they have income and assets both under $100,000. If either goes over, then you can take 10% of their income or assets. So it's pretty reasonable. So if you've got a $100,000 a year income and that's guiding you, then you can give up to $10,000 in 1 year in investments in crowdfunded securities. Pretty reasonable standard. Issuers can raise up to $1 million through crowdfunding. Again, a reasonable amount of money for a startup to get in a first round raise. There are also disclosure requirements, audit requirements if you raise more than $500,000. A review is required if you raise more than $100,000. Fairly reasonable seeming provisions to guide the issuance of securities to common folk. Again, a huge departure from the traditional securities laws that have largely prohibited people who are not accredited investors from even participating in private securities. Now, Reg A, and I'm not going to say much about this, but Reg A is a scarcely used provision of securities law. Reg A, I think there have been, the SEC said, 8 or 9 filings that were successfully closed in the last decade in the whole country under Reg A. But the legislature, Congress, said we ought to fix this because there is, what we're seeing in the capital markets is we don't ever see IPOs anymore, and certainly not IPOs of small, growing businesses like Microsoft. You say, what do you mean? Now Microsoft is China. When Microsoft went public, it was a relatively small business. It had a $400 million market cap. Compare that to Facebook, which went public with a $100 billion market cap, right? Regular folks were not allowed to participate in the creation of value at Facebook. But we were 30 years ago or 25 years ago in Microsoft. And I think what Congress has recognized is depriving ordinary citizens of the opportunity to participate in that growth is a travesty. And so they've corrected it with Reg A. And the idea is that of the changes in the Jobs Act is to allow for a simplified public offering process for offerings up to $50 million. So it reignites in me a hope for the days of the 1980s when entrepreneurs all wanted to go public. Entrepreneurs are trained now, right, to never want to be public. It's the worst thing in the world that could happen to you, right? But in the olden days, we used to all want to go public. And why? Because you could have your cake and eat it too. You could sell part of your company, put a bunch of money in your pocket, and still run the company. It could be yours. It was magical. And there are a few entrepreneurs like Myron Wentz here in Utah, and a number of others that have done that sort of thing, where they've created public companies that they still run, and they've been able to put lots of cash into their own pockets and continue to run and control the companies they founded. And that, I think, should be inspiring to entrepreneurs. Now let's talk more about this general solicitation. And the reason I want to talk about this, the SEC regulations that govern general solicitation are described in Regulation D, Section 506C. So you'll often hear now in crowdfunding circles a discussion of Reg D 506C. And the reason is, if you're talking about crowdfunding today, what really is going on, the only crowdfunding actually happening, by and large, is under 506C. So we're still selling securities to accredited investors, but we're advertising to the general public. Now that may sound like it's just the same old, but it really isn't. Most accredited investors have not been participating in private securities. They don't have the time, they don't have the inclination, they don't have the education. Well, now we have systems in place and laws that make it much more reasonable for people to be participating in the private securities market. Ironic that we call this private issuers publicly raising. This is kind of a new acronym that's developed for this practice, a PIPER. In any case, I want to make sure we highlight a couple of things. The law does require that you document the accreditation status of your investors. In the olden days, 6 months ago that is, you could just ask an investor, are you accredited? Do you have sufficient income? Do you have sufficient assets to meet qualifications for being accredited? Now you have to document that. The law also bans bad actors from participating in companies that are raising money this way. There's no minimum offering size. I talked to a company yesterday that was raising $100,000 under this model. But there's also no upper limit. So we see very large institutions now are spooling up infrastructure to do offerings under this rule. I think we will see this become a huge part of the securities industry, as we'll begin to all get familiar with offering language, as we'll start to see advertisements in a variety of forums for securities, which we haven't seen in the past. There are no new disclosure rules effective yet, and I don't anticipate that there will be. A broker-dealer is not required to be engaged. Yes, you have a question?
When you say documented to prove you're an accredited investor, does
Yes.
that mean by assertions in writing by the accredited investor, or do they need to show a bank statement?
It is a vague and sort of being defined area right now by practice, but it is clear, one thing is clear, it is not enough to have the investor self-attest as being accredited. So the accreditation status needs to be established by, your attorney can attest for you, your CPA can attest for you, or you can provide documentation to the issuer that you are accredited. Great question.
Thank you.
And you don't need to do this offering through a broker-dealer. You can. There are crowdfunding platforms aplenty now where you can do this kind of thing. Under the Title III, the sort of real crowdfunding for everyman, there are a number of problems. What we've come to appreciate is that although those standards look reasonable, they make an offering, especially a small offering, rather expensive. Now, especially this is true if you're in New York. Because if you're going to raise more than $500,000, you need to do an audit. If you're going to do if you're going to raise, let's imagine you started a business yesterday, and you're going to start a crowdfunding offering of $600,000 tomorrow. You need to have an audit, even though there is no history in your business. So it creates interesting requirements like that. You also have to provide disclosure to the SEC front and ongoing, and there is some ambiguity in the draft regulations. And again, this part is there are no effective regulations. We're dealing with draft regulations only at this point. But the draft regulations are a little bit ambiguous about some things, like whether all of the information needs to be publicly available all the time. In other words, if you have to put your projections and that stuff out. And yes, question?
Is there a timeline on the regulations?
Yes, we expect that the final regulations will be issued probably in the next 90 days, and they'll probably be effective 60 to 90 days after that. So it'll be very soon. And also because you can't raise very much money, I don't see a lot of people using Title III to raise money as it's currently written. There are two kinds of exceptions I see to that. The SEC did say you can do a simultaneous offering under Title III with a Reg D 506C offering. So if you're doing a $10 million raise and you're hoping to reach primarily accredited investors, but you also want to make it available to non-accredited investors so that you can have your friends and family participate, and you're going to do an audit anyway, then it would make sense to go through the extra few hoops that would be required to do a crowdfunding offering at the same time. Now, there are two schools of thought on what will happen with crowdfunding, with Title III. One school of thought is that the market will find solutions. The biggest single problem in the law is the cost of an audit. Now, if you're in New York City and you are two guys with a startup idea and you go to an audit firm and say, we need an audit of our business that we created yesterday, chances are you will spend $40,000 on that audit. But that is not true in Salt Lake City. There are a number of audit firms that are quality audit firms that would probably audit that two-day-old business for less than, and probably significantly less than, $10,000. So in Utah, it's not as big of a problem. If a Utah firm decides to create a national program for solving this problem nationally, I think there's a real opportunity for that kind of firm to solve this problem and create a streamlined process for auditing startups so they can meet this requirement. So one school of thought is the market will solve this problem. Audits will get more affordable, and we'll be able to using software and affordable systems and processes, we'll be able to make sense of the crowdfunding rules eventually. The other school of thought is that there will be a legislative fix, that some of the rules that seem most onerous, the ongoing reporting, the audit requirements, etc., may be addressed and amended to become a little more reasonable by Congress. And some are thinking that that could happen literally any day now. That could be an amendment attached to sort of any bill that may be semi-relevant in Congress, that we may see some changes to the Jobs Act imminently. It'll be interesting to see if that happens. A third possibility, and I was, for a time, I tell you, I really thought this was the solution. I'm a little less convinced, but intrastate crowdfunding. That is, doing offerings within one state. And Georgia has the clearest, best law on this. In fact, even before the Jobs Act passed, Georgia created a unique exemption from federal securities laws for those who would do an intrastate offering. And it really is exciting. If you do an offering of less than $1 million, you can take up to $10,000 from any individual. There's no requirement for a broker-dealer, no requirement for a portal, no new disclosure requirements. It's just the easiest securities offering you could imagine. Obviously, you're subject to anti-fraud provisions and other things, but there is no federal filing required. You do a notice to the state, and that's it. Very easy. The reason I've lost a little bit of my enthusiasm for this is there is, in federal law, it makes clear that this only applies, you're only eligible for this intrastate exemption if you will only be doing business in that state. It's not just a matter of where you get your investors, where you will do business. So if you're going to be doing business on the internet, then it wouldn't be a very effective exemption for you. So I've lost a little of my enthusiasm for intrastate crowdfunding, but states are getting on the bandwagon, and many states are looking at legislation. I hope Utah will as well. And certainly for Main Street's kinds of businesses, this makes perfect sense to have an efficient way to raise money from friends and family. And most of you who've raised money know most of the money is going to come from people you know already. And if you have a strong, deep Utah network, it's possible you would raise all of your money in Utah anyway. So it isn't a big deal. The challenge there really is how you do business. Now, there are a lot of platforms developing for crowdfunding of securities, and all of these and literally there are over 100 platforms now that are doing investment-based crowdfunding. And so AngelList is one of the biggest and earliest. They've been around for a long time, but they, even before the regulations were issued for crowdfunding and general solicitation, AngelList got a no-action letter from the SEC for their particular model of crowdfunding. So WeFunder, Seed Invest, AngelList are all oriented toward, and Crowdfunder are sort of startup-oriented, technology company kind of oriented platforms. Gate Global Impact, Return on Change, Mission Markets, those are all platforms for businesses that have some sort of social cause associated with them. Realty Mobile, Prodigy Network, and Real Crowd are three that are targeting real estate. And interestingly, real estate is really where the transaction volume is happening right now. There appears to me to be maybe twice or three times as much transaction volume going on the real estate side as on the startup company side. Our Crowd, I didn't mention, is also one. It's Israeli-based, operating in the US and Europe, and they're growing very quickly. And that's a startup-oriented side as well. Now, I have a question for a securities lawyer. Are there any securities lawyers in the room? Are you the only one, Todd? Okay, Todd, come up here. Do you mind? I'm going to give you a copy of my book if you can answer one question correctly. Okay. Todd, what is the most regulated activity in the United States?
Being a taxpayer, I don't know. Security, issuing stock.
There you go. There you go. Okay. So, thank you very much, Todd. You did an outstanding job there. In all seriousness, when you talk about issuing securities, it's tempting to listen to someone like me and think, if Devin can figure this out, I can figure this out, I'll do it on my own. I'll tell you, the first thing I would do if I were raising securities, I would talk to Todd. You cannot do this without legal help. If you don't, and I wouldn't recommend you hire a criminal attorney to help you with your offering, but if you don't hire a securities attorney to help you with your offering, you may need a criminal attorney because you're likely to get in trouble. I want to talk a little bit now about some of the how-tos, just a little bit. I don't want to get lost in kind of a quagmire here, but let's focus on some real basics. First of all, I want to make sure that we are clear that at least today, when we talk about raising money, even if you say, I'm going to go crowdfund my offering, you can't just crowdfund it in the sense of putting it up on the internet and expecting investors to come find you. That's not going to work. In fact, you're going to have to do this in a dual approach kind of thing. You're going to have to do a lot of stuff old school. And just so we're clear, those two beautiful cars, what's the car on the right? Who recognizes the car on the right? Tesla, yes, there you go. Yeah, so I do too. So, you know, the big difference between these two beautiful cars is what's under the hood, right? The one on the right is an electric engine. That's definitely the future of transportation. The propulsion for our cars in 20 years will all be electric. But that beautiful Mercedes on the left is hardly a problem. And that's kind of how the securities business is today. It may be exciting to talk about crowdfunding, but in fact, a lot of the activities required to raise money today are the same old school kinds of things we've always been doing to raise money. So you're going to be raising money by looking for angels, right? That's the first thing. You're going to be using your network to try and track down those people in our community that make a business of and are serious about investing in startups. You're also going to want to get all of the people and friends you know in a kind of one-at-a-time assault on raising money. You need to ask every person you know who is or may be accredited to participate in your offering. And these things will kind of rock back and forth and influence one another, right? If you get some really smart angel investor or investor group to invest, it's going to be a lot easier to bring in your less sophisticated accredited investor friends, your doctor and lawyer friends who aren't accustomed to investing in securities to participate. But by the same token, if you can go to the angel community and say, I've already lined up 10 friends who've committed a total of $50,000 to participate in my deal, well, that's going to give the angels comfort that they don't have to put up all the money, right? It's the synergy of the two that really is the opportunity in 2014 for raising money. For now, though, we're really talking about raising money from accredited investors. The non-accredited crowdfunding is going to begin, and I would now say slowly, beginning later this year. You want to be sure to put this on a platform, and the platform sophistication varies, but you want to not only put your basic information, but I would encourage you to use the platform as the primary communication mechanism for your investors so that all of your investors have access to the same information. So you put your offering documents up there, you put your prospectus or your offering memorandum there, the closing documents. You can create a video pitch that explains your offering in your own voice. You can put product slicks and demos. I mean, all that kind of stuff can go on the site so that people can see everything they want to know about your business and have kind of an equal access to information. Now, I'm happy to take questions for a few minutes. But a couple of things. If you visit yourmarkontheworld.com/feedback, and you can do it on your phone, you'd leave me a little bit of feedback. You can then get a download of the slides, and you can have that picture of the cute little angel, and also get a download of my book, Crowdfunding for Social Good. I also have with me some free passes to Pluralsight, a great Utah company for technology training, and one of the things that I've done is a crowdfunding training for Pluralsight, and so you can get a free 1-week access to Pluralsight so you can see my online course. But questions? Any questions for me today? I've got one story to share before we wrap up. Ted?
Devin, I missed the introduction, but I know there's a top 20 list of crowdfunding experts in the entire universe. Where are you on that list right now?
I'm number 16.
Outstanding.
Yes, thank you.
Congratulations.
Yes, Tom?
Tell people mechanically what to do. I mean, where do they start?
So literally the first thing I would do is call Todd or another securities lawyer. But you're going to need to put together an offering memorandum. It's going to be a business plan that your lawyer helps polish. It's going to discuss risk factors and other things. So you've got to pull that together. You may want to put some additional information. You'll want to think about with your attorney, what financial information and financial projections are appropriate. You'll need to think about how you value your business. You'll want to start talking to people who are knowledgeable about startup valuations. The interesting thing is there is a broad range of what people think is fair in a deal among entrepreneurs and investors, so you need to be thoughtful about that. But just go to one of these sites, and the best list of equity-type crowdfunding sites that I know of is on a website called thecrowdcafe.com. It's run by a young guy by the name of Jonathan Sandland, and he is really one of the deep thinkers in the investment crowdfunding world. And so you can go look at his list, but certainly the platforms I've given you give you a broad sampling of what the sorts of crowdfunding sites are. There are kind of two schools of thought in the crowdfunding world among equity, and there are some that are very selective. They're screening deals just like venture capitalists do, and they put forward their deals to their investor group principally. You can bring your friends and family to it. Those sites are rather appealing because it's sort of like venture capital. If you get onto the platform, you have a very high probability of getting funded. But the challenge is getting onto the platform. Other platforms are open to anyone who wants to put forward their deal, but then you have a much greater responsibility for bringing the investors to the table. So those are some of the basics. And then when you start raising money, it really is just it's the hand-to-hand combat. It's just talking to everyone you know. It's sending out emails. Emails are among the very most effective ways to communicate. You can post it on Facebook and Twitter, but my experience in crowdfunding tells me that although there is a lot of apparent activity in crowdfunding on social media, the real action is all still the hand-to-hand combat. It's emails, it's phone calls, and it's the personal contact. So, other questions? Let's see, we've got maybe time for one last question if there is any more. Okay.
Yeah, can you do multiple crowdfunding sites? Can you go onto multiple ones at the same time, hoping to get accepted to one of them? What happens there if you end up being accepted to two of them?
Yeah, some of them are probably okay with that, and some are probably not. Those that are curating their deals more carefully and screening more may not want you to be on other sites. Those that are taking all comers probably are not going to complain if you put your deal up on two sites. The issue becomes, in my mind, where you close the transaction, because most of the sites are designed to have closing tools, and I wouldn't, as an issuer, wouldn't want to be doing closings on 2, 3, 4 sites. I'd want to be running a closing process on just one.
Okay.
Okay, great question. Well, listen, let me give you one last little story. I want to tell you about 9-year-old Vivian Haar. Her parents went on a date one night, and they went out and they went to a Lisa Christine gallery. And Lisa Christine is a photographer who takes photos of people in the developing world, mostly in very impoverished situations. And one of her favorite themes is looking at people and photographing people who are in slavery. It's a rather tragic theme, but she captures these people that are suffering and brings attention to it. In fact, there are nearly 30 million people who are living in slavery today. more people than at any time in the history of the world. It's just tragic. Well, they took this book home. They bought a book of Lisa Christine photos, and 9-year-old Vivian was flipping through the book. And one of the pictures in this book was a picture of 2 8 or 9-year-old boys, and they had big rocks strapped to their heads. And the rocks were tethered across their heads, but resting on their backs. The rocks clearly weighed more than these boys did. They were in Nepal. And their job was to carry these massive rocks down the mountainside to the point where trucks could arrive, right? Because they were being quarried above where there were roads. And so these little 8-year-old kids were slogging down the mountain with the rocks. And Vivian said to her parents, "Why are these little boys carrying rocks?" I think she appreciated that did not look like fun. And so her parents explained to her that they were slaves. And Vivian said, "Well, wait a minute, I thought Abraham Lincoln got rid of all the slaves." And they explained that no, there were still people that were living in slavery all around the world today. And Vivian said, "Not on my watch." Little Vivian Har said, "We're not going to stand for that anymore." And so she started doing a lemonade stand every day to raise money to end slavery. And she began she added a crowdfunding campaign to that, and within a year she had raised $100,000 to end slavery. And then she and her father did another crowdfunding campaign and raised $400,000 to launch a business, Make a Stand Lemonade, where 5% of the revenue, not 5% of the profit, 5% of the revenue goes to organizations that are fighting to end slavery. Crowdfunding can change the world. Now let's do some good.